أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. In previous courses we addressed the different types of water that we have, the plain water. We said we have water that is connected to a source. We also call this running water or ma'il jari. We have rainwater. We have large quantities of water that is not connected to a source. We call Korr, we'll discuss today. And then we have a small quantity of water. If you turn to page 16, towards the end of the page, the author discusses methods or ways for us to purify water that has become najis. If water has become najis, how do you purify it? Let's look at the types of water quickly to see how we can purify it. So the first type of water is the water that has a source. Can someone just refresh our memory and give us an example of water that has a source? For example, a spring or a well. If water has a source and a drop of najasa falls in it, like a drop of blood, and it does not change the color or the taste or the smell of that water, does that water become najis? No. So do you need to do anything? No. There's nothing that you need to do. A drop of blood, let's say, falls in a well, which is connected to the aquifer, to the water table. It has a source. And you don't see any trace of that blood. There's no smell really, there's no taste, there's no color. Just act as if that najasa did not even fall. Does not do anything. What if it changes the color, the smell, or the taste? We said that affected area only becomes najis and the other parts are tahir. Now if that area that is affected becomes najis, let's say the color changed, the smell changed, the taste changed, how does it become tahir? All you need to do is to remove that affected area. If the change goes, or let's say you mix the well, right? You mix the well so well, such that the odor is gone. It's diluted. The color is no longer visible to your eye, right? The taste is no longer there. Does that make the well tahir? Yes. As long as that change goes, either on its own, or you do something to make that change go away. Usually in the past what they would do if a well would become najis, they would put those buckets of water, and in that affected area they would just pull that water, throw it away until you get new water coming into the well, and the change would just go. So if the change goes, whenever water that has a source becomes najis through the color, through the taste or the smell, for it to become tahir, all that needs to happen is for that change to go away. That color to go away. That smell, that taste to go away. Whenever that happens, it becomes tahir. So that's the first type. The other types of water, such as the big quantity of water, what do we call it in Islamic law? We call it Korr. Today we'll discuss the Korr. Like a swimming pool. If you have a drop of blood that falls in a swimming pool, but it does not change the color, taste, or smell, does it make it najis? No, it does not, because why? It's immune. It's a big quantity of water. What if one corner of that swimming pool turns red because of the blood? That corner, that affected corner is najis, but the remaining water, the remaining parts of the swimming pool are pure. So all you need to do is get a bucket of water, just take that out, extract that water out, and the pool will be tahir. Or mix it thoroughly so well, such that you no longer detect a tangible change. That also makes it tahir. Yes.
How do we treat the presence of frogs in the well?
The presence of what?
The frogs.
The frogs?
Yeah.
What's wrong with the frogs?
They live in there.
That's fine. Even if
They are contaminating constantly.
See, in Islamic law, we have what is called najis and tahir, and then you have something that's contaminating a well. Now, a frog is not najis. A frog is not a najis animal. If you touch a frog, it's not najis.
Continuously urinating and then polluting the water.
Okay.
Some of them, they die in there.
Okay. Let's say a frog dies in there. First of all, ask this question. Is this animal, when it dies, najis or not? So because it's cold-blooded, it's not najis, right? Now, if you suspect that an animal is contaminating the water, as long as you don't see traces of that contamination, color of that najasa, smell of that najasa, taste of that najasa, it's okay. It's fine. So now with the swimming pool, if on one corner it's najis, the color changed, if you remove that water out of the swimming pool and the rest is looking fine, that becomes pure. But what's the equation here? The equation here is that, let's say that corner, that affected corner, put that on the side. The remaining clean, clear water, right, that has no color changes, that has no changes in the smell or the taste, that remaining water, is that remaining water a Korr or not? That's key here. Let's say you have a small pool, where if you look at that affected area, which has that change, the remaining part, if it's less than a Korr, then this is najis. And there's just really no way for you to remove that change and consider it to be pure, because the remaining part is less than a Korr, all of it just became najis. However, if the remaining clean water is more than a Korr, the water is immune, and therefore you can clean the entire pool. You can purify the entire pool. Just take that blood out, and the remaining is fine. It's connected to a Korr. It makes it clean and pure. Is that clear?
What is Korr meaning?
We'll discuss what a Korr is. It's a large quantity of water. It's a certain volume of water. If water reaches that volume, it becomes immune. It becomes pure. Meaning that just by coming into contact with najasa, it doesn't automatically become najis. Like a big swimming pool. So, if the remaining clean water meets that condition of being Korr, then all you need to do in that swimming pool, just take the blood out, take the affected water out, and the remaining is pure.
Say we're at the swimming pool, and there's a lot of kids usually urinate in the pool, and we can't know that or tell if they did it. So what would we do then?
So if one suspects that a child has urinated in a pool, if you are not detecting the presence of urine in that pool, either through the color of it or let's say the smell of it, then it's okay. You can consider that to be clean, even if you know for a fact that there's urine in there. We're not talking about the scientific presence of urine. Obviously, if you take that water to a lab, you can detect urine in it. But in Islamic law, what's detectable to your senses is what counts. So that swimming pool is still clean. It's clean in the sense that it's not najis. Yeah, it's still contaminated, obviously. You know, for hygienic purposes, you should clean it, add chlorine, purify it. But it's not najis. You know, if you just put your hands in there, your hand will not become najis. You could still pray, that's fine. Yes?
Is oil like najis? So like an oil spill? You know?
Oil itself is not najis, but it can become najis.
So like, let's say I live in an area where there's an oil spill, for example. And that water is my source.
It doesn't become najis, but obviously it becomes contaminated for, you should avoid that water, not because it's najis, just because it's not safe. If there's a spill of oil in the water, it does not make it najis. Because oil is tahir, it's pure. Unless you make the oil najis. So that's another way to, purify the korr. Now what if you have a small amount of water? Like a bucket of water, a cup of water. If you have a small amount of water, if one small drop of najasa falls into it, does it become najis? Yes. Do you have to wait to see the signs, whether the color is changing, the taste is changing? No. You don't need that. Just as soon as it comes into contact with najasa, it automatically just becomes najis. Now how do you purify water like that? Let's say you don't want to waste it. The easiest way is get this water that's contaminated, that's become najis, the small quantity of water, and just pour it into korr water. Take it and pour it into, let's say, a swimming pool. A large pool of water. Obviously you've purified it. Or another way is to connect this water to a source of water. So let's say you have a bucket of water. Take the hose, and let's say the hose is connected to a source. Open it and pour the water on it. Once you get that connection, you also purify it. As long as, of course, the najasa is no longer visible in it, meaning there's no color, there's no taste, there's no smell. Once you've connected this to a source, it becomes clean. That's one way to purify it. Is that clear? How we can purify a small quantity of water? Let's say you don't want to throw it. Let's say you're in a desert, you're in need of this water, and you want to drink this. And there's a pool, let's say. It's a pool there, and you don't want to waste this. You can just pour it in that pool, or connect it to that pool, or if you have a hose, and this cleans it. This purifies it. So on page 16 and 17, this is what the author is discussing here. Now let's go to the heading Ishtibah al-Tahir bin Najis. If we have, yes brother.
I'm sorry. What if the polluted water is impure and it rains on it?
Okay, very good question. If you have a small quantity of water and you put it under the rain, it rains on it. Even if it's just a few seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, there's just rain. Does that purify it? Yes. We said that rain purifies water like that. So if there's a ponding of water on the street and it's najis, if the rain comes and the najasa is no longer there in it, because if the najasa is still in there, it's going to contaminate it again. But let's say you don't see any traces of that najasa, such as the blood, such as the urine, that becomes clean. So that's another good way to clean a small quantity of water if you have rain that's coming down. Just take this, put it under the rain. As long as the rain is falling on it, it makes it tahir. It makes it clean. Yes, that's another way to purify ma'il qalil. Under this heading, there's an interesting case in Islamic law here. If I have 2 bottles of water, initially they're both clean. One drop of najasa falls in one of them, but I don't know which. I know for a fact that a drop of blood, a drop of urine fell in one of them. I know that for a fact. But then they got mixed up. I don't know which is which. So I have 2 bottles. I know one is clean for sure. I know one is not clean. But I don't know which is which. What do I do here in this case? The law of continuity can't help you here, because you don't know which one was the clean one and the najasa fell in it. Because the najasa fell in it, that's a good question. Why doesn't the law of continuity apply here?
Because you're not certain.
Because you broke that certainty with a new certainty. How? You were certain that this bottle, let's take bottle number 1. I was certain that this bottle here was tahir yesterday, or whenever the company made it, right? It was definitely clean. But then I got new certainty that a drop of najasa for sure either landed on it or in the other bottle. Now, for technical reasons that are, beyond the scope of this course, the law of continuity here does not apply to this because it contradicts the law of continuity in bottle number 2 as well. Because what you could do is, look, I don't care about the other bottle. Let me look at bottle number 1. I know this was pure, so I just say it's still pure. Well, you could say the same thing to bottle number 2. I could take bottle number 2 and say, this was definitely pure an hour ago. Now I'm not sure. I know some najasa landed either in it or in the other one, but I'm not sure which one. So I consider it to be pure. Now you've considered both to be pure when you know for a fact one of them is not pure. So because the law of continuity contradicts in both of them, it does not apply. Even the law of tahara, purity, also contradicts in both of them, so it does not apply. Now these are technical aspects of this case. So if you have 2 bottles of water, 2 containers, you know one of them definitely became najis, but you don't know which one. What happens here? We have here what is called in Islamic law, ilm al-ijmali. What's al-ilm al-ijmali? Al-ilm, you all know what that means. What does that mean? Knowledge. What does ijmali mean?
Collective.
No, that's jama'i. There are several translations. One is ambiguous knowledge. One is presumed knowledge. Ilm al-ijmali has 2 parts. One of it is ilm, which means there's certainty. The second part is ambiguity. Is this a contradiction? That you have ambiguous certainty? Why not? Why is it not a contradiction?
Because you're certain there's some ambiguity.
On the one hand, you have certainty that a najasa fell. That I am certain about. But on the other hand, where did it fall? In bottle number 1 or bottle number 2? That's ambiguous. That's why we call it ambiguous knowledge. There is certainty, but there is also ambiguity. So whenever you get a case of ilm al-ijmali, what do you do here? A hadith from Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam clarifies our position. If you go to this hadith under the heading Ishtibah al-Tahir bin Najis, that's page 17 or 18, right? Which page is it in your edition? 18. Ishtibah al-Tahir bin Najis on page 18. سئل الإمام عليه السلام. The Imam عليه السلام was asked عن رجل, about a man, معه إناءان. This man has 2 containers, 2 cups. وقع في أحدهما قذارة. In one of them you have najasa. Qadhara in Arabic is just another word for najasa. A contaminant. A contaminating agent. Linguistically, that's the meaning of qadhara. Anything that's impure. لا يدري أيهما. But this man does not know which is which. He's got 2 containers, 2 cups. He knows for sure the najasa fell in one of them, but he does not know which one. What does he do? وَلَيْسَ يَقْدِرْ عَلَى مَاءٍ غَيْرِهِمَا. He doesn't really have a third water that he can use. Because if you have other water, you're told, okay, just leave these 2 and go to a clean bottle, so you're sure it's clean. Let's say you don't have. What do you do in this case? قَالَ يُهْرِيقُهُمَا وَيَتَيَمَّمْ. The Imam ﷺ says, let him pour them. Don't use them, spill them, and let him do tayammum. Spill them and do tayammum. Why? Because whenever you have ambiguous knowledge like that, in Islamic law you have to avoid both of them as precaution. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have two bottles. You know one of them for sure is poisonous. What does your intellect tell you? Take a chance? It's a 50-50. I mean, you're not going to die 100%. Maybe you are lucky and you get the pure one. But what does your intellect tell you? Spill them both. Don't use them both. Same with najasa. If you know one of them for sure has a najasa, avoid both of them. Don't drink them. Don't do wudu with them. So if you're stuck in a desert and you want to do wudu, don't do wudu with this. Now yes, if you are about to die from thirst, obviously you can drink water that's najis. Now that's to save your life. But don't do wudu with it. Avoid it and just do tayammum. Tayammum is where it's a type of ablution purity where you are doing wudu with the dust. It's called tayammum. It's not really called wudu. Wudu is only for water. It's called tayammum when you're out of water.
See how you said there's both bottles and one of them is najis? Why don't we combine those two bottles, make a larger quantity?
So if you have these two bottles and you combine them to make a larger quantity, that still would not help. We're still considered najis. What you did in that case, you just made the other one najis too, for sure. Now you can say both of them are najis. Because the pure water met the najis water, they all became najis. So in this case, because of the hadith of the Imam alayhi salam, the Imam says, you spill both of them. And in that case, we just do tayammum and we avoid drinking it. So this is about ambiguous knowledge. Now let's skip the next heading because we've already discussed it in the previous courses when we talked about pure and clean water. Basically, to summarize it, the author is saying that if you have a small container of water, it's not Korr yet, and it's najis, can you say, let me pour water in it until it becomes Korr? Will that purify it? No. That water, that's najis, the small quantity of water, it has to connect to a full Korr for it to be purified. You can't keep pouring water on it until it becomes Korr, and then you would say, okay, now this is a Korr. That's not enough. Because the Korr that you have right now is really not a Korr, because some of that was najis water. You should have a full Korr in order for it to clean that little water, that small quantity of water. So you can't just fill up your bathtub and say, I'll fill it until it becomes a Korr. That will purify the small water that was impure in it. That doesn't work. A full pure Korr needs to meet that small quantity of water for it to purify it. You can't just fill it up until it becomes a Korr. So this is just, a reminder that if you fill up something to become a Korr, it will not purify it. Is this clear, or should I explain this further? Is this clear?
But if you have a source to make it...
If you have a source, that's another issue.
Right.
If you're connecting it to a source, that's fine. But let's say you're not connecting it to a source. You're just pouring bottles. Let's say you have a bathtub, right? There's some water in it, and najasa falls in it. What happens to that water? It's najis. Now you want to purify it. The easiest way is to connect it to a source. But let's say you don't have a source. You're like, wait a minute. My bathtub, if it's full, it will become a Korr. So let me take all this water that I have, keep pouring it in it until it becomes a Korr. That will not purify it. Because you need the water, the small quantity of water that's najis, it has to meet a Korr directly. You can't keep filling it until it becomes a Korr. That will not work. It will not purify the water. The whole water will be najis. So in the following heading, الماء المستعمل بالوضوء والغسل. We know that water that has been used to wash a najasa, that water that you use to wash a najasa, is that najis or tahir? Let's say I took this bottle of water, there was blood on my hands, and I used some water to wash my hands. That water that dripped from my hands, that I used to wash the blood, that water, is that najis or tahir? Obviously that's najis because it came into contact with the najasa. In Arabic, we call this water ghusala. It's basically water that you use to wash something najis. That's called ghusala. Water that you drain out. Let's say I'm trying to clean my cup. I pour water, right? I spin it just to make sure it's clear. And then I spill out the water. That spilled water is najis because it came into contact with the najis. So this is what ghusala is. So the ghusala, water that you used to wash the najasa, you can't reuse it again, obviously. Is that clear? You can't reuse that water because it's najis. The water that you used is najis. Let me give you another clear example. Let's say I have a large bucket of water here, a container, a large container that's empty. I take this bottle and I wash my hand, which has blood on it. I wash it, and that water drips into that container. The water that spilled into the container, is that najis or tahir? It's clear why it's najis, right? Does anyone have doubts as to why that is najis? It's najis. That water that spilled into the container, what do we call it? We call it ghusala. In Islamic law, it's called ghusala.
But what if you do the wudu with that?
Okay, we're getting there. So this is ghusala from a najis is najis. What about ghusl and wudu? If I take pure water and I'm doing my wudu and the water is dripping, if I collect that dripping water, can I do wudu with it again?
Yes.
Yes. It's pure. You could use it to wash najis. You could reuse it for wudu. What about ghusl? If I'm doing ghusl and the water that I'm using to wash myself, I'm recollecting that water. That water, the ghusala from the ghusl, let's say, right? Is that najis or tahir?
Najis.
Why is it najis?
Because you're cleaning your impurity.
No, let's say my body is pure. I just have to do ghusl, right? There is no, because if there's najasa, it falls under the first category that we talked about. Let's say you've purified your body. Now you want to do the niyyah of the ghusl. So you use this water to do the ghusl. When you collect that water, you could reuse it again. There's no problem with that. Some scholars in the past did have an issue. They said that if you do wudu and you collect the water from the wudu, that's fine, you could do wudu with it again. But if you're doing ghusl al-janaba, for example, and you're recollecting that water, you can know it's pure, it's not najis. You could use it to wash blood, let's say. But you cannot reuse it for another ghusl. But this, opinion came from a minority of scholars. Today, scholars say you could reuse it. There's no issue there. Now, what's the proof that you can do wudu again with water that you've done wudu with? What's the proof? A hadith.
It's not touching anything impure?
It's not touching anything. No, let's say that there is no impurity on your body. You're doing the ghusl and you're collecting that water. Can you reuse that water?
Yeah.
You could reuse it, yes. There's no problem. Even though some scholars in the past would say no, you cannot reuse it. It's makruh, by the way. It's unrecommended to use that water which you've used to do a ghusl. It's mustahab to use fresh, new water, but it's not haram. You could reuse that water. So what's the proof that we can reuse water that we used for wudu? I can use that same water to do wudu again. A hadith from the Imam alayhi salam. قال الإمام عليه السلام, that's under the heading الماء المستعمل بالوضوء والغسل. Water that has been used in wudu and ghusl. قال الإمام عليه السلام كان النبي صلى الله عليه وآله, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وآله, إذا توضأ, when he would do his wudu, أخذ ما يسقط من وضوئه, the water that would drip from his wudu, the companions would rush and race each other to collect that wudu, to collect that wudu water. فيتوضؤون به, then the companions, after collecting those drops, for the barakah, the blessing of it, they would do wudu with it. Now, it's interesting, if some of these extremists, Wahhabis were present that day, immediately they would have said to those companions, oh, shirk, shirk, why are you seeking the blessing of the water of the Prophet, right? Because when you go to the grave of the Prophet, and you're showing your respect and you're seeking the blessing, for them that's shirk. They will beat you even there. I've seen them standing at the Prophet's tomb, beating anyone who's trying to seek the blessings of, the tomb or the cage. Well, here's a hadith that Sunnis and Shia have narrated. That when the Prophet ﷺ would do the wudu, the companions would come to seek the blessing of the Prophet by collecting those drops of wudu. Even hadiths in Sunni books say that when the Prophet, for example, sometimes would go to a barber and he would cut his hair, the companions would fight with each other to collect those hairs from the Prophet. Why? Because they knew this had barakah, blessings. Why didn't the Prophet tell them, no, this is shirk, this is blasphemy, why are you doing it? So, according to this hadith, we can use water that you've done wudu with, or somebody else has done wudu with.
But you could argue that that's barakah of the Prophet that he can do it.
Yeah, but it's halal and haram. See, it's not an issue of barakah. The Prophet would not do something that's haram. If it was haram for you to go and use someone else's wudu water, the Prophet would apply it. Or at least he would make it very clear to them that this only applies to me. So they were seeking the blessing of it, and it was halal. That's why if it was something haram, obviously they would not go to seek the blessing of it. I mean, can someone say, you know what, let me draw blood from the Prophet because I want to seek the blessing of it? That's haram, you can't. Or someone says, let me drink the blood of the Prophet. Since it has barakah, I'm going to drink his blood. No, it's haram to drink blood. Even if it's the blood of the Prophet, it's still haram. It doesn't make it halal just because you're seeking the blessing. It has to be halal. So, in this paragraph, the author is just explaining this issue that whenever you do wudu or ghusl with water, as long as there's no najasa in it, you could always reuse it. There is a difference of opinion historically about this. Some scholars in the past would not allow you to do ghusl with water that had been previously used to do ghusl with. But the majority of scholars do allow that, and we do have, some other hadiths that the Imam alayhi salam mentions. Let's read, for example, the third hadith. وَأَيْضًا, you see, in the 5th or 6th line, وَأَيْضًا سُئِلَ عَنِ الْجُنُبِ. The Imam alayhi salam was asked about a junub. Junub is a person who's in the state of janaba. يَغْتَسِلُ بِمَاءِ الْحَمَّامِ. This person washes himself with water from those public baths. هَلْ يَغْتَسِلُ بِهِ غَيْرُهُ. Can someone else come, that same water that this person used and it was recollected in that tub or container, can another person use? In our modern society, some of you might find this disgusting, right? But remember, water was scarce. Especially if you live in a desert environment, you can't afford to waste water. There's no rivers, there's hardly any rain. Every drop of water you have, somebody has to break his back and take it out of a well. Many people were poor, they couldn't afford it. So this was actually common. People would reuse the same water until it becomes very dirty where they can no longer reuse it, right? But if you have this clean water and only one person washed himself with it, we're assuming there's no najasa. The person's body is clean, they're just doing a ghusl. They're just washing their body. They're just taking a shower, right? Or just doing wudu. So they would not actually spill such water because water was scarce and they needed every single drop. So the Imam ﷺ is asked, if I go to a public bath and this is the case, somebody else showered with that water, but there's no najasa in it. It's clean, but it's been used. Can I do my ghusl? Can I shower with it? What does the Imam ﷺ says? The Imam says, لا بأس أن يغتسل من الجنوب. Says it's okay. لا بأس means it's okay. If someone was in that state and they did ghusl with it, you can also do ghusl with it. So these are some proofs that we can use to establish that water can be reused again for ghusl and wudu.
What's the ruling of urine? People are seen drinking urine of animals.
So the urine of, well, inshallah in the next section, we'll talk about the najasat, what are the impurities in Islam, and one of them is the urine. Now the urine of some animals is pure, like for example the urine of a camel,
Is pure.
the urine of a sheep, any animal that's halal for you to eat, basically the urine of it is also clean in the sense that it's tahir, it's not najis. Now it's haram to drink their urine except camel urine, where if there's a medical purpose for it, then there are hadiths that you could use it for medical purposes. So if the doctors say it does have a medical purpose, it has some benefits, then one could use it.
So the urine of the cow in India, they frequently.
We're not talking about a culture or a belief or a superstition. We're talking about medical benefits. Ask a doctor, regardless what his faith is. Does this have any benefits or no? Let's say someone has a disease, and in 7th century Arabia would go to a doctor. If the doctor would say, for your disease, the urine of a camel is a medicine for you. If that's the case, then yes, they're allowed to drink it. Otherwise, Islam says unhygienic things, things that people consider to be disgusting, we're not allowed to eat them or drink them. Like insects, a spider. Is a spider najis? No. Even if you kill it, is it najis? No, it's not najis. But can you eat it? It's not halal for you to eat. Why? Because it's considered to be amongst the khaba'ith. It's not najis, but it's disgusting, let's call it. Khaba'ith are just, anything that is considered to be a type of impurity, but it's not technically najis. There are some exceptions, like a grasshopper, for example. A grasshopper, even if we consider it to be a type of insect, but in Islamic law, it's halal to eat. The meat of it is halal to eat. And people in the past, it was very common for them to eat it. Nowadays, yeah, you probably won't see anyone eating it, but it was pretty common in the past. And medically, it's been proven that it's not harmful like other insects.
So, for the example of the urine that is like park, but not allowed to consume. So if it touches your clothes are not najis, but you can't.
Your clothes is not najis. If it spills on your rug, anywhere, it's not najis, definitely. But the question is, can you drink it? Can you consume it? If there's a medical purpose for it, yes. If it's not, it's considered of the khaba'ith, then no, you cannot consume it.
But the human urine is different.
Yes, human urine, yeah, definitely. Because human is not halal, right? Human meat is not halal, so the urine is also najis. We're just talking about halal animals. Animals that are haram, like let's say a dog, a lion, a cat, their urine is najis. Only halal animals, their urine will not make your clothes najis if they spill on you, for example.
Is it based on being eating herbivores, basically, eating grass?
And it has to be halal. Except the birds, we'll talk about that later. Most birds, their urine or whatever they discharge is considered pure.
They're dropping.
Yes, their droppings are tahir. So if it gets on your clothes, yeah, we should wash it, but it doesn't make you najis. Now let's talk about the korr. We've been hearing this word, korr, right? It's a large quantity of water. How much is it? Let's get to know this korr. First of all, what's special about the korr? There's a hadith from an Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam in which he says, so Imam al-Sadiq says, إذا بلغ الماء قدر كر لا ينجسه شيء. Let's first dissect the hadith and then see what a korr is. The Imam says إذا. What does إذا mean? If or when. بلغ الماء. Water reaches. بلغ means it reaches. إذا بلغ الماء. If water reaches قدر كر. The size of a korr. The volume of a korr. لا ينجسه شيء. Nothing can make it najis. In other words, it's immune. If a small drop of najasa falls in it, without changing the color, the taste, the smell, it does not make it najis. So that's a special status given to a korr. Now when we examine this hadith, in Arabic, we have something called mantuq and something called mafhum. Whenever you look at a hadith, there is a mantuq to that hadith. What's the mantuq? Mantuq is pretty much the meaning or the ruling that's being stated in the hadith. Whatever directly is being stated in the hadith, we call the mantuq. So everything that is directly stated. And then we have something called al-mafhum. This is one of the very deep aspects of Islamic law. We're right now just explaining it at a very, very basic level. The indirect, something that is indirectly stated. Let me give you an example. If I tell you, if you come to my house on Friday, I will give you a gift. What am I directly stating to you? On Friday, you come to my house, you're getting a gift, right? Yes. That's directly stated. But there's an indirect statement here as well that everyone can understand. If you come on Thursday, will you get a gift? Well, where did I say that? That if you come on Thursday, you're not getting a gift. Where did I say that?
Because you specified Friday.
When you say a sentence like that, if you come to my house on Friday, you're getting a gift. That means if you're coming on another day, you may not get that gift. Right? I'm only giving this promise. So the mantuq is that which is directly stated in your words, in your speech. Which is, on Friday you're getting a gift. The mafhum is the indirect message you're telling me, which is what? That if you come on another day, you may not get that gift. You're not directly stating it, but it's inferred from your speech. And this is very common. You know, like a father, a mother could tell their child, you know, if you clean your room, then I'll love you. What is that inferring? That if you don't clean your room, then I might not love you, right? Or if you do this, for instance, then you'll get a result. Obviously, then if you don't do it, you're not getting that result. So this is what we call the mantuq and the mafhum. What's directly being stated and what's indirectly being stated. Is this clear between the mantuq and the mafhum? Any questions about that? Let's apply it to the hadith. The Imam says if water reaches Korr, nothing can make it najis. What's the mantuq here? That which is being directly stated. Korr is immune. Whenever water is Korr, it's immune. Nothing can make it najis. It won't become najis if you have a drop of najasa falling into it. Or your hand is najis, you put your hand in that water, it's not going to make it najis. What's the mafhum, the indirect statement here that's inferred?
That if it's less than Korr, it is not immune to najis.
Right. If it's less than Korr, it becomes najis. Right? If it's less than Korr, it becomes najis. So in one statement, we can extract these two laws. Law number one, a Korr is immune. Law number two, anything less than a Korr is not immune, it becomes najis. So the Imam tells us that there is a special status to Korr. Now how much is the Korr? In order for us to know how much a Korr is, the Imam ﷺ has given us a very easy way to calculate it. And basically, it's a volume of water. Does anyone know what a shibr is? It's a handspan between your thumb and your pinky. That is called a shibr, right? In some languages like Farsi, they call it wajab. So shibr is just a handspan. How much is this? 10 centimeters, 5 inches? How much is this? On average, how much would this be?
6 or 7 inches.
5, 6, 7 inches, just depending on your hand, right? A Korr is water that its length, width, depth, each of them is at least 3.5 shibrs. 3.5 handspans. So 3.5 by 3.5 by 3.5. Who's good in math? What's the volume of all these three? Can someone do the math for us? 42 point what?
42.875.
42.875. 42.875. I hope it's accurate, huh?
It is.
42.875. Whenever you have water of this volume, 3.5 by 3.5 by 3.5, if it's a total of 42.875 or more, that is a Korr. Now, why did Islam specify this? Remember, Islam is a religion for everyone. Not only for the one who is a genius in calculating the volume of water. Whether you're in the desert, in the forest, in the city, no matter where you are, the Imam gave you an easy way to figure that out. And anybody could use their hand, right? Just count 3.5, 3.5, 3.5. If you see that all sides pretty much fit this criteria, that water is considered what? Korr. Now these days we no longer deal with the handspan. We have exact measuring devices, right? Even in the past there were exact measuring devices, but most people did not have access to them. Most people did not know how to use them. So the Imam would give, Islam would give, an easy way to determine the volume of that water. Now in today's world, we can determine that exactly. So if you want to translate that into gallons, right? Because we no longer know how to deal with these handspans. We're not used to it. How many gallons is that? This is equivalent to about 101.5 gallons. So whenever you have a quantity of water that is at least 100 gallons, that is what? A Korr. It's immune. What's the average bathtub? How much water does it hold? Does anyone know? The average bathtub holds how much water? Average. 80 gallons. So just an average medium-sized bathtub, if you fill it up, it will contain 80 gallons of water. 80 gallons, is that Korr? No. So if your bathtub is filled, and one small najasa falls in it and it's only 80, does that make all of it najis? Yes, it makes all of it najis. But if you have a bigger bathtub, which holds more than 100 gallons of water, that is immune. It's Korr. So your swimming pools, the jacuzzis, any pool that is bigger than 100 gallons, that is Korr. It's immune. It doesn't become najis just because it comes into contact with najasa. It retains its purity. So that's the definition of a Korr here. Now, if you want liters, it's 384 liters for those of you who deal with liters.
300?
384 liters. So this is basically for us to know how much a Korr is. So whenever you have, let's say, a bathtub, and you quickly want to know if this is Korr or not, you don't have like a measuring device that tells you how much that is, right? You would have to go and, get that, what do you call them? That measuring stick or a ruler, let's say, or that tape, measuring tape. And, you want to do these very precise calculations, get the height, the width, the depth. Let's say you're in a hurry and you want to know, just use your hands. See if the length is 3.5, shibrs, and the height is at least 3.5, and the depth is at least 3.5. Then you're sure you've got at least a volume of 42.875. You can consider that to be Korr. Now you could say, what if somebody has small hands? Somebody has big hands, right? What do you do in that case? If your hand is an average hand, meaning compared to most people, you fall within an average size of hands, you could still go by your hands. Now somebody whose hand is a little bit bigger than your hand will get, different measurements. You need a little bit more water for you to satisfy that, but that's fine. All that is still considered Korr. Any Korr that was determined using an average hand is considered Korr. But what if someone has smaller than average hands? Meaning, compared to people in your society, that hand is smaller than average. Would that be acceptable to constitute a Korr? No. If someone has very large hands, abnormally large hands, and for them to get a Korr you need like 200 gallons, right? Because you have to just measure so much. Is that necessary? Even for that person who has those big hands, is it necessary for them to get such a big bathtub? No. You just go by the average. Whatever the average is, it's accepted. Anything below the average or above the average is not the standard. Now this also, inshallah, when we will discuss wudu, this will be an issue in wudu. Because to wash your face, you have to wash between these two fingers, the middle finger and the thumb, right? When you wash your face, you don't have to wash all the way up to your ear, right? It doesn't have to be. Yes, as a precaution, we do that just to make sure we cover the face. What's wajib is where? Whatever is included between your thumb and middle finger. That is the wajib that you have to wash. Now, what if someone has very small hands, where it's only reaching your cheeks? That's not the standard. Or what if someone has such large hands that they're reaching his ears? That is also not the standard. So whenever we talk about these measurements, because the reason why I state this, because in Islamic law you will see this recurring, where some of these measurements are determined by your fingers, your hands. Whenever that is stated in the hadith, it's referring to what? The average. Whatever the average is. You could have slight variations in the average, but whatever is considered average is acceptable. So this is a Korr. Anything that is 101 gallons or more is considered a Korr. It does not become najis so easily unless you just change the color of it, obviously. And it really makes life easier, because whenever it comes into contact with najasa, your hand is najis, just dip it in that pool, take it out, your hand is clean. It's immune. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.